Hey, this is GatorX, and you might be thinking, why do you keep talking about Detective Pikachu? Well, it's because I love it so much, and it's a ripoff of Digimon, at least according to Gizmodo. Now, normally I don't talk about articles or anything, but I don't know, found this one interesting. It's just maybe something to talk about. So the title, Nintendo needs to stop putting Digimon in Pokemon. You know, forget the fact that it's mostly Game Freak managing Pokemon, and Nintendo's more in charge of owning it, distributing it, you know, we won't get into that because that's all geek stuff. So obviously we got a very angry picture of Ash from Generation 7. Now the whole thing of, like, you know, Digimon being a Pokemon ripoff and this, or Pokemon ripping things off from Digimon, I think we need to stop that. They're pretty separate. The only comparison you can make is that they're monsters. They have animes, video games, and we're the ones comparing them to each other. So let's get into some of the meat of this article. Now, we've all seen the trailer from the first live-action Pokemon movie, Detective Pikachu, obviously, and it feels like it's time to voice some concerns about some of the newer pocketable monsters Nintendo's been stealthily incorporating into the games for the past few years. To put it simply, Nintendo's been trying to pass off Digimon as Pokemon, and it's time for the treachery to end. Okay, strong way to start off your article. Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave? It's not that Nintendo has ever literally tried to pass off Bandai's Digimon as Pokemon, but rather the more recent generation of games have introduced new monsters to people familiar with the Digimon franchise come off as being more digital monster than pocket monster. Now the whole thing of, like, oh, the new Pokemon look weird, or oh, the new Pokemon don't look like Pokemon. I think that's a whole thing of, like, we're just not used to it. I mean, you know, for whatever reason, you can go to Australia, you can see a bunch of the animals there, and you can say, like, these animals don't seem like animals, they're so weird. I mean, what? Who designed these? You know, something like that. Obviously, though, Pokemon and Digimon too are made up, right? We come up with not we come up with designs, but the companies come up with designs for them. So obviously things change along the way, and it's not just one person designing Pokemon and everything. It's a whole team of people designing the Pokemon, and there's a lot that goes into the design process of Pokemon specifically that I'm not necessarily sure of, but you know, that's what they choose to make Pokemon. And obviously you don't have to like every Pokemon you see. That's the beautiful thing about Pokemon, is that there are so many different kinds, and that people like, dislike, and, you know, ones that people dislike, some people like. You know, I love Garbodor. I think it's great, especially in the trading card game and everything. Like, I kind of don't get how this is still a thing, how we can say, oh, newer Pokemon don't look or feel like Pokemon. Ever since the public first learned about the Johto region and the fact that Nintendo pretty much always planned to unveil more Pokemon than the original 150, there has been a vocal contingent of fans insisting that the new additions simply don't qualify as real Pokemon. It's easy enough to understand where that feeling comes from, given the significant impact that the Pokemon franchise had on the collective childhood of the 90s. Oy, then one of those people. I mean, you know, not saying anything about the person writing this article, anything too negative, except that he wrote a bad article, I believe. Let's see, but while people might not like the monsters Nintendo's rolled out after the first generation, the point stands that they're the creatures the company has decided to immortalize across the video games, television shows, and films. Well, if you say it right there, like, oh, it doesn't matter, because that's what they chose. It's normally, like, around gens 3, 4, 5-ish where the stigma of, like, oh, these don't feel like Pokemon, or oh, these are weird, starts to come from. Generation 2 was, like, very closely tied to Generation 1, and as we know, with, you know, just general Pokemon knowledge nowadays, because of, you know, great Pokemon channels and everything, and great information being out there, we know that a lot of the Pokemon implemented into Generation 2 were designed along with the ones from Generation 1. In that, you know, they designed around 200 something Pokemon originally, but only put in 150 in the first game, and the rest, you know, they put into Gold and Silver, and, you know, they designed some new ones also for Gold and Silver. But Gold and Silver, you know, Generation 2, it's very, very closely tied with Generation 1, and very close in design as well. You know, it's still different. It's still its own thing. It still feels like, and again, you know, the whole, like, it feels like this, but it all still feels like Pokemon, a lot closer to Generation 1. And, you know, each generation feels a little like the last, but also a lot more like its own thing. That's just how it is. And again, you know, these, for the most part, there are a lot of Pokemon that say are designed, you know, maybe Generation 7 even, where their design would fit in Generation 1. It's just a thing of, these are all Pokemon, and yes, they're each different in their own way. And they feel different, which, you know, over the years have kind of gotten a little different. But, yeah. Okay, let's move on. That being said, it's difficult to deny that post Red, Blue, Green, Yellow, something changed about the about the kinds of Pokemon that Nintendo was willing to put its stamp of approval on. And while a great deal of them are absolutely delightful, and Polion and Aegislash come to mind, many of them are well questionable because they don't exactly look like Pokemon. And again, like I said, it's the whole thing of they don't look like Pokemon. You can't necessarily say that. Anything new is not going to look like the old thing. It's not going to feel like the old thing because it's new. You might as well, you know, just say, with this type of logic, you might as well say that Pokemon should have just stopped at Red and Blue. They shouldn't have made any more games after that. And, you know, the whole thing of like, oh, you know, they planned for Gold and Silver to be the last one, but it was really popular. And again, they liked it too. So, you know, it continued. You might as well just say that. You might as well just say Pokemon should have only been one generation and it shouldn't have continued. Because how else, no matter what, even if they kept relatively the same design philosophy, which they keep a pretty similar design philosophy throughout a lot of games, I feel. But let's say, you know, even if they did that, even if, like, they tried to make Pokemon a lot more like Generation 1 throughout the rest of it, like, well, then a lot of the complaints would, and, you know, it's the whole thing of, like, you complain about one thing, but in an alternate reality, you'd be complaining about the thing that you advocate for. So, yeah. A lot of the complaints would just be like, oh, Pokemon feels all to the same. It's nothing new. And even, I think even now, a lot of that is that I kind of feel that maybe. Okay, so moving on. Let's see. The Pokemon franchise. Hang on, the Pokemon franchise we know today wouldn't exist without Ken Sugimori, the video game designer who created each and every single one of the original Generations monsters, including Mew. He didn't create them. He had the final say. From what I understand, he did have the final say on a lot of them, and he drew all of them. And, you know, still today, he draws, like, the official artwork for every Pokemon. But specifically, you know, earlier this year, we learned, Atsuko Nishida, I think it was. Forgive me, I can't remember her name. But, you know, the woman who designed Pikachu and its evolutions. You know, we learned a lot about that earlier this year with the reveal of Gorochu and how it was supposedly supposed to be like an evolution of Raichu. And, you know, of course, lots of people design the Pokemon. A lot of people work on them together. And they're all brought together, and, you know, it's like kind of, not a think tank kind of thing, but, you know, it's a group effort to design these Pokemon. I don't know specifically how it goes on there, but obviously, when you have 150 Pokemon, one guy's not going to design them all. And of course, Ken Sugimori is a great guy, and, you know, he's done a lot for Pokemon, but he didn't design Pikachu and Raichu, at the very least. We know that. And I don't know if they've stated who else has designed a lot. Well, obviously, Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, obviously he would have had to design a lot of the original Pokemon as well, because, you know, it's his game. He was the one who created it and then directed the first two games, I believe. Yes. In the original 151's design, Sugimori's artistic sensibilities and quirky sense of humor are readily apparent. Take, for instance, Voltorb and Electrode, two monsters who are basically just knockoff Pokeballs with faces. There's cheekiness to the simplicity of their designs, made all the more chuckle-worthy by the fact that their only real method of attacking is self-destruct, knocking themselves out in the process. Okay, so there's a lot of thing of like, oh, you know, you complain about Generation 5's designs, but Generation 1 had like Voltorb and Muck and everything. Like, I don't think that's necessarily a great point, like a great counterpoint to bring up. Yes, I think their designs are great, but they're not anything too special. But, you know, here's someone who's trying to prepare for that counterpoint saying, oh yes, this was a great design and everything. I think they're an alright design. Of course, there's plenty of other first-generation Pokemon with more intricate designs, like Mr. Mime or Mewtwo. But again, their looks all feel part of a cohesive overall aesthetic that defined the earliest Pokemon, or the earliest video games and trading cards. I mean, Mewtwo, you could say Mewtwo looks a lot like a Digimon. You could say that, but it's not true. Well, you know, it could be true, as in he looks like a Digimon. He isn't. Let's see, but as for the Pokemon franchise has grown over the years, the task of coming up with and illustrating new Pokemon has become a team effort. It was always a team effort. While Sukamori is still very involved in the process, finalizing new monsters, many of the ideas then begin with artists who have, let's say, different tastes. Yeah, different taste. Is there anything wrong with that? It's impossible to look at Pokemon like Lucario, Blaziken, Gallade, and not be reminded of the monsters from Bandai's Digimon franchise, in part because of how human-like the creatures are. While most Pokemon feel distinctively inspired and reflective of actual animals and inanimate objects sometimes, there's always a kind of heightened fantastical nature to Digimon because they put simply are digital facsimiles of real things. Okay, says Mewtwo and Mr. Mime are the great intricate designs of Generation 1, but they're human-like Pokemon also, especially Mr. Mime, and especially in the trailer we saw. He's bald and he's got the tiny little hairs on his head. Lucario still, even though it is kind of human-like, yeah, okay, you can make the comparison to Lucario and Talmon, because that's been made a lot. But Lucario is still an animal. Blaziken's still a chicken. Gallade, okay, Gallade, you know, you got me there. It's a little more human, like, oh, you got me, oh. But, I mean, okay, let's just keep reading. Let's see. Each stage of a Digimon's evolution, from its fresh level to its final form, increases complex and more video game-like. What begins as a simple dinosaur can end up as a jousting warrior, a huge bird-like hoverboard, jousting warrior riding a huge bird-like hoverboard through the sky. Yeah, you know, you can say that. Which, I mean, I think that's true. Digimon's designs, when they get to the end, they're a lot crazier, and not in a bad way. I think they're really good. It fits the aesthetic. But, you know, I think we need to get rid of that whole, like, Digimon and Pokemon are, like, counterparts to each other. They're very different, and especially when you look at the history of Digimon as well. And it's unfortunate that Digimon is, not that it's struggling to become its own thing, it has become its own thing, but in the eye of the public, it's kind of struggling to differentiate itself as something new, as something different, which it should be considered that. Let's see, while Pokemon hasn't quite gone that far off the rails yet, it's gotten pretty damn close. Okay. With the introduction of Ultra Beasts. Oh, here we go. Pokemon from another dimension first appeared in Pokemon Sun and Moon. Let's see, there's concept behind them that's all difficult to make sense of, but their aesthetics make them feel more battle-hardened monstrosities as opposed to kinds of monsters young children would be carrying in their pockets. I think you just gave the answer there. They're from a different dimension, so they don't look like Pokemon. You know, I think we discussed that a little bit. When Ultra Beast first came out, you know, we're like, oh man, Ultra Beasts look so crazy and so weird. Oh, but they're from a different dimension. That's why. They're supposed to look like monstrosities. They're supposed to look ugly. They're supposed to look like giant buff mosquitoes, which, by the way, Buzzswole is the best Ultra Beast. Not competitively, but it's the best looking Ultra Beast. Let's see. Of course, the inclusion of these these newer, less traditional Pokemon doesn't at all detract from the presence of their more staid peers, but as Nintendo continues to branch out in the wild new world of live-action productions, it's going to be a weird life if the company insists on creating monsters that straight up look like they don't belong in the real world. I don't know. Okay, we discussed this a little yesterday with the whole ugly Pokemon thing. You know, these aren't real creatures. They don't belong in the real world, which is why they look a little uncanny in the live-action movies, you know, in the CGI. But that's kind of the point. These aren't real creatures. And yeah, that's kind of the point. These aren't real creatures. And I'd hate for, like, get to the end of this thing and say, like, oh, you know, the main thesis is you can't say what a real Pokemon feels like because we don't determine that. And on top of that, like, even if we did determine it, anything new is going to feel different. Big shocker there. For the most part, like, yes, Pokemon designs, I think, have gotten a little more intricate. You always point to Generation 5, you say, oh, those designs are really complicated, they're too busy, they're, you know, so big. Personally, I like a lot of the Generation 5 designs, but, like, for the most part, they're all still very Pokemon in a way, you know. Small thing, it evolves, it gets bigger, stronger, not uglier, but it looks different. You know, you go from a little Charmander to Charizard, and while Charizard is still relatively like smooth and soft in its design, you know, compare that to like Axew. Axew is like a little cute dragon, evolves into Fracture, which Fracture is a little more serious, and then Haxorus, which Haxorus is, you know, a big cool dragon with an axe face. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It looks a little more busy because, again, the designers have gotten a little more skilled and a little more not necessarily that they've gotten more skilled, but willing to try different things and wanting to try different things, because, you know, that's just the nature of it. But I don't know, let me know what you think about this article down in the comments below. Again, you know, it's a whole thing of like, oh, this doesn't feel like Pokemon. What feels like Pokemon? I guess that's a topic we can even discuss at some point. Leave a comment below, let me know what you think of this article and what feels like Pokemon. Again, you know, you're allowed to dislike Pokemon, you're allowed to dislike new designs, but you can't necessarily come out and say that they don't feel or look like Pokemon. I suppose you could, but how exactly are you going to say that? And I don't know. What, again, like, how much like the original generation should it feel like? Let me know what you think of this article and the topic down in the comments below. Leave a like to show your support, subscribe, enable notifications. That'll make you a member of the Chingling Squad. And I hit the table, I'm sorry. But anyway, the countdown to Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee continues. Two more days left. Oh shoot.